Hi, this is Sandy Baird, and this is Commentary. Before we march off to the state houses or to Washington to demand gun control, read the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution or to the Vermont Constitution, adopted before the U.S. Constitution by the First Vermont Republic in 1777. Both constitutions guarantee the right of individuals to bear arms. Vermont goes further. Our little republic guaranteed the right not to bear arms. No mandatory draft here. Proponents of gun control argue that the right to bear arms is limited, as the right appears to be linked to the formation of militias. But that confusion was cleared up by the U.S. Supreme Court, which in 2008, in Washington, D.C. versus Heller, stated that the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution does apply to an individual's rights to bear arms. Citizens of most countries do not have the right to have guns, nor do most countries have bills of rights. Many do not have constitutions at all. So before we alter our Second Amendment, let's understand what we are asking for and understand that, like any other right, the right to bear arms derives from a certain historical context which is still relevant. The Second Amendment was incorporated as part of our Bill of Rights, or the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution in 1791, and it states, quote, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." The Second Amendment was part of the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, and it was called the Bill of Rights. That bill of individual liberties was an order to the state that all people had fundamental rights by birth, and that the police powers of the state could not curtail those rights. The people of the United States had the right to speak, to worship or not to worship, to assemble, to enjoy a free press, and were guaranteed to have these liberties by our Constitution, which limited the powers of the police and the state to interfere in those freedoms. The rights of speech, assembly, and religion were in the First Amendment to the Constitution. The right to bear arms was in the Second. The government of the United States, therefore, is a limited one, limited by the Bill of Rights, which commands that individuals have fundamental freedoms that cannot be trimmed or abrogated by the state. Most states do not allow ordinary men and women to bear arms. Most states want a monopoly on legal violence. Why did the United States almost alone guarantee the right to bear arms? Born as a colony of one of the strongest imperial powers on earth, the British Empire, Americans struggled to build their own nation. With no say in the British Parliament, America's rebellious nature stirred and became a demand for independence against London, its monarchs, its aristocrats, its caste system of the birth-entitled privileged lords and ladies, its church-state theocracies, and its regulated mercantile economy, which demanded that the colonies serve the interests of London. The colonies then revolted, and in the first successful anti-colonial revolution, they overthrew the British and created a republic and a society described by historian Gordon Wood as a society unlike any that had been ever seen. In a radical revolution, the Americans overthrew monarchs, aristocracy, and theocracy, and established a republic based on the idea of the equality of all men, born with unalienable rights to be free from the tyranny of the state. With the experience of being a colony, and with the experience of their revolution, Americans knew that the empire had guns, and that their revolution had not been won with flowers. The new republic then guaranteed that a free citizenry had to have the rights to defend itself against the tyranny of an always expansive state and to be secure in those liberties. Although the new republic kept African American slavery, the most glaring exception to its ideals, the United States then was born with the ideas of free, equal citizens who had the right to elect and to consent to government, or to change or revolt against that government when it was necessary to protect liberty. Today, many ask if this history is relevant. In the face of school shootings, violent crimes, the drug trade, urban unrest, riots, war, honest people have argued, no, weapons have changed. Mental illness stalks our citizens. The National Rifle Association is a too wealthy lobby influencing corrupted politicians to vote for guns. Regulations and perhaps even confiscation of guns from certain Americans has become necessary, some would argue. Even President Trump, the darling of the NRA, has suggested the confiscation of guns without legal process, and to worry about those constitutional protections of due process and equal protection to be considered after the guns have been grabbed. Shouldn't the types of guns and types of citizens who can have guns be regulated with background checks, age restrictions, and types of restrictions on guns that can be sold, and other restrictions? Shouldn't they all be legalized? Shouldn't gun laws be reformed so that school massacres, like in Florida, will be eliminated and prevented? Shouldn't citizens give up their Second Amendment rights for their own security, even if they have to give up their liberty? In all the well-meaning, well-intentioned uproar about gun violence, remember that gun violence occurs all over the world with assault rifles, tanks, drones, planes, bombs, poisonous chemicals, nukes, and they are all produced and sold by the largest producers and holders of these weapons on earth, the United States government. Mass weapon violence is not mainly committed by ordinary men and women. Massacres are mainly caused by governments in the oldest institution of violence on earth, war. Why then isn't the demand on all concerned citizens to tell our government to disarm, to stop producing and selling these awful weapons all over the world, and the making of assault rifles and the creation of all the weapons of mass destruction so that no one sells them, no one has them, not citizens, not the police, not the armies, not the mercenaries? Not only then would the NRA be still able to argue that citizens should have the right to bear arms, not only would we preserve our already inflated budget by limiting military spending on these awful instruments of death, not only would we preserve the Second Amendment and our Bill of Rights, by taking away the practice of our governments to make and sell weapons of mass destruction, by demanding that the state disarm, we would be acting constitutionally, and we would also ensure that mass killings all over the world would be a lot fewer. This is Sandy Baird, and this is Commentary.